What is up, guys? Today we're going to be continuing the restoration process on our 1994 MX-5 Miata. In the last video, we focused mostly on getting the new carpet and the seats installed. Since then, we've had a couple updates, which I'll cover here in just a moment. But today we want to focus on reinstalling some more of the interior trim pieces, as well as a brand new catback exhaust system. Unfortunately, when we picked up the car, it did have the exhaust system cut off right before the diff, so it's just dumping out right underneath the car, and we definitely need to get that fixed before we take it out on the road. So starting off with updates since the last video, this part wasn't on camera, but I did want to make note of it for anybody else out there that might be dealing with this issue or something similar. After we got the car put back together, I went to start it up to move it back into its normal spot within the garage. And as soon as I turned the key, there was no crank, no start, none of the lights or anything else would work. I wasn't sure at the moment what the problem was, but I ended up taking the dash out again because of that issue. Plus, if you remember, there were some wires with connectors that I couldn't find where those plugged into. So I ended up taking out the dashboard again just to make sure that everything was plugged in properly. I wasn't missing anything, and I ended up in the same spot that I was when I ended the video. So I then started to take a look around the car, see if there's anything obviously wrong, and I thought to check the fuse panel because maybe a fuse had blown in the car. And as it turns out, one of the 80 amp fuses here in the engine bay had blown. It might be hard to see it on camera, but you can tell that the middle section is completely melted away and is no longer connected. I ended up picking up another fuse at AutoZone or Advanced Auto Parts, one of the two, threw that in the car, and it was great to go. I'm not sure exactly what caused the fuse to blow. I did have the battery connected the entire time when we were doing the work, and I thought that that wasn't a big deal because the battery in this car is so dead that even when the car is running, if you turn it off and then go to immediately start it up again, it just doesn't hold enough power to actually start the car. So I didn't think that that was a problem, but there might be some correlation there. Usually when you're messing with electronics in the car, it's always best practice to disconnect the battery. Speaking of those wires underneath the dash, I didn't find anywhere that those empty connectors could plug into. It's highly likely that those are for some options or features that weren't on the car, maybe depending on what market it's sold in. I'm guessing that they use generally the same harnesses, but then just depending on what options or features are on the car, depends on if those wires have connections or not. The last update to share is I talked about in the initial video how bad the soft top was, specifically the window in the back really needing to be cleaned up. Unfortunately, as soon as we started applying any sort of pressure and cleaning to it, the actual vinyl window itself kept cracking and tons of spots all around. I think it was just really too brittle and old to be reused. So we ended up picking up a brand new, well, not brand new, but new to us, soft top from a friend. Big shout out to Chris for giving us a great deal on this black vinyl soft top that also has a glass back window. So we're super excited to throw that in. I might end up doing that one on another video. We'll see how the progress today goes. But that's it for the updates since the previous video. Let's go ahead and get started with the exhaust system. We've already got the car in the air, so let's get underneath and get the old one removed. I could tell almost immediately that the old exhaust was going to be troublesome to remove. The connection between the mid-pipe and the header was very rusty, but I was hoping my impact wrench would free them without too much trouble. Instead, I ended up rounding off the nuts and they didn't seem like they wanted to go anywhere. I believe that the socket I used was a little bit too loose for the bolts. The next size down seemed like it was the correct fit, but it didn't quite want to go all the way onto the nut. And I think that's because of the rust that had built up around it. In hindsight, I should have cleaned that off prior to trying to hit it with the impact gun. But this is the situation that we're in, and now we have to try other methods. I started using an angle grinder to cut through the exhaust studs and get the old mid-pipe off without damaging the header flange, since I was trying to avoid having to take this to a shop for another weld-on solution. After what felt like hours of cutting away at it, I decided to take a break by changing out the transmission fluid and speedometer cable, while I had access with the car up on jack stands. Transmission fluid changes are pretty straightforward. The only difference between that and an oil change is that you'll need a fluid pump, a 24mm socket for the drain plug, and then a crescent wrench is what I use for the fill plug since it has a square head. Remember to always remove the fill plug first in case the drain plug doesn't want to come off. That way you haven't emptied out your transmission fluid without any way of putting it back in the car. Speaking of transmission fluid, I always use Motorcraft manual transmission fluid. This stuff has a reputation in the Miata community and for really good reason. I've used it on my other NAs and MBs, and it really does improve the shifter feel even in a high mileage car like this one. It's definitely worth the price. Speaking of, I always get mine from rockauto.com. No, this is not a sponsor video, but they do genuinely seem to have the best price online. If anyone else out there knows where to find it for cheap, definitely drop that down in the comments below. Next, it's time to replace the speedometer cable that broke in the last video. So you can see we've got one end here and the other end goes to the transmission underneath the car on the right hand, or in the US, the passenger side. So you've got the cable that goes from the dash through the firewall here, and there's a little grommet that sticks in. I already kind of removed this from the firewall. You can see it there, but it then goes behind the engine, down under the car, and then underneath the car right here. And then it goes actually through the little, I forget what this brace is called, but it goes through this structural member and connects to the side of the transmission right up there. So we're gonna go ahead and disconnect it from this end because we've already got it disconnected up inside the vehicle. I'm going to take some pictures first of the routing just to make sure that we get that perfect whenever we put the new cable in. Now I just noticed here in the engine bay that the speedometer cable, try and get the camera angle right there, it is actually clipped in to the firewall, and so I'm not exactly sure how that's clipped, but I think I'm going to have to remove this little ignition coil pack here in order to get access to it, because I just can't really fit my hand through here very well. So you've got a couple of bolts, one here, or at least you should. Mine doesn't. There's a third bolt that's on the bottom of the ignition coil little assembly here. I think that's a 12. I'll tell you here in just a moment. All right, so we got the ignition coil distributor block thing loosened up. It was 12mm bolts. So right down here is where the cable was sitting. This little tab of metal was just folded over itself and holding the cable in, kind of like that. So I was able to pull on the cable itself to kind of unbend that metal tab and then lift it off like that. Something that should be very, very simple, but there's always something in the way. So again, we removed this, or at least just got it unbolted so we can move out of the way. I did have to unplug the two cables behind it and then the cable for the cam angle sensor there. Remember that these are specific cables, so whichever one came out of this side must be plugged into that side and vice versa. But overall, not too bad. So now it looks like we can go ahead and fish the entire old speedometer cable out and then route the new one back in the same way. After we got the new cable routed, I went to go put the gauge cluster back in the car and plug it in. However, that's when I found out that the new speedometer cable doesn't fit. As it turns out, the end on the new speedometer cable, this inner diameter, is only about 16 or 17 millimeters. However, the outer diameter of the receptacle where it plugs into on the gauge cluster is 19 millimeters. So be wary of that when you get these aftermarket cables, especially these ones with this yellow end. I've seen a few of them floating around out there. I assume they're pretty much all the same, despite the fact that the part number on the bag matches what the OEM cable is. It doesn't actually fit, and of course doesn't come with that grommet that I mentioned earlier. So instead, we ended up picking up this brand new cable off of eBay. I found this one for about $40, so it seemed to be a really good deal. It did come with the new grommet and looks exactly like the OEM cable. If you look at it next to the other one, you can immediately tell the difference in size on this end here, this connector, and I did already check. This new one does match what's on the gauge cluster. So we'll go ahead and throw this one in, and then that should solve our speedometer cable issues. I also decided to put some more of the interior trim pieces back into place to give the car a more complete look. This is a part I've been wanting to install since we got the car, a brand new AC panel. It simply snaps onto the module that houses the sliders, knob, and AC button, and then you secure it with a screw at each corner. Always be cautious not to over tighten these screws. That way we ensure we don't break any of the plastic components that they're holding in place. Then we install the slider knobs. These have a tiny Phillips head screw holding them in on the bottom of the knob. The screw goes into a small hole on the slider handle itself. These can be tricky to get right without dropping and losing the screw, so just take your time and have some patience and you'll get it on. The AC button and fan knob are easy to install. Just get the knob in the correct orientation and push it into its home. Same thing for the AC button. Now with these installed, we can add back in the tombstone panel. There's one electrical connector at the top for the hazard and pop-up light button, and the panel itself is secured to the dash with 3 screws, one behind each eyeball vent and the other on the bottom left corner. And finally, we can add the center console back in. I had to trim the carpet out for the 3 screw locations on the bottom of the console so that way it would sit properly inside the car. These are the screws. There's one in the cup holder area and then 2 under the armrest in that little cubby. Notice, however, that I trimmed the carpet near the shifter on the passenger side a little bit too short, and now it's sticking out. I'll get a fix for this, but I just wanted to show it to remind you to leave more excess when doing this and other similar types of work. Now back to the exhaust. Compared to how easy this should have been, this proved to be one of the most difficult exhaust systems that I've worked with. The connection between the mid-pipe and the header was so rusty and stuck that they might as well have been welded together. I used a hacksaw to remove the majority of the mid-pipe, and for some of the areas where I couldn't quite get the angle grinder to fit, I kept cutting away until I was able to get what was remaining of the exhaust studs out of the header. Here is what some of the aftermath of that looked like. I apologize for not filming this portion. At this point, I was hours into working on the car, I was tired, and I just wasn't really sure how much longer it was going to take. So now that I've gotten this far, I used the angle grinder to clean up the surface, essentially sand the surface of the header flange to hopefully prevent any exhaust leaks in the future. Then I began fitting the new exhaust system, which proved to be not exactly easy either. A quick tip, make sure to use soapy water or a high temperature grease at the exhaust hangers. This will make it a lot easier to remove the old ones and reinstall or just install some new ones. The muffler section was far from a perfect fit. Flash Shark Racing claims that this exhaust fits all in a Miata's 1990 up to 97, doesn't matter, what options or trim it was. But unfortunately, that didn't quite seem to be the case. The first thing that I had to modify was removing the stock subframe brace. This would have interfered with the muffler section itself, but once we got that out of the way, the muffler was in some sections of the pipe and the tip rubbing against the rear bumper and then those mounts for the rear subframe brace. Thankfully, the mid-pipe went on without any trouble. It fit really well, not sure why it wouldn't. But the one thing I didn't realize sooner was that the stock catalytic converter had been cut off previously at some point and a test pipe was welded in its place. For that reason, the mid-pipe didn't actually reach all the way to the header. I needed to fill in that space with something, so I decided to grab a test pipe from Goodwin Racing. These run like $100 and it had flanges already welded in place. It came with new gaskets, new studs, and nuts. So I decided to go that route just to get the exhaust system functioning, and that way I didn't have to take the car to a shop for a weld-on solution now and then potentially again later down the road. It took quite a bit of time playing around with the exhaust and adjusting it to get everything to fit, but I was able to finally tighten down all the bolts. I'm hoping that maybe later down the road, after the exhaust goes through some heat cycles, same thing with those brand new rubber exhaust hangers, that everything will sort of settle into place and maybe I won't have any rubbing issues, but we'll save that for another update in the future. So after several days of working on the car and many long hours, we finally have a complete exhaust system for our lovely Miata, as well as a functioning speedometer cable and more of the interior trim back where it belongs. In the next video, we should be taking the car out for its first real drive. I'm super excited for that, although I'm sure I will inevitably find more things that need to be fixed or adjusted. So make sure to stay tuned. Let me know in the comments what you think so far, and if there's anything particular you would like to see as we continue this restoration process. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.